You back. Trade relations between Nigeria and the United Kingdom currently stands at about £7 billion. Well, this is according to the British High Commissioner to Nigeria, Mr. Richard Montgomery. The breakdown of these trade figures reveals an intriguing equilibrium. While the UK exports approximately £4 billion worth of goods and services to Nigeria, Nigeria in turn exports around $3 billion, £3 billion, I beg your pardon, worth of goods to the United Kingdom. That's $4 billion from, $3 billion from us. That's showcasing a relatively balanced exchange of goods and services. Interestingly, well, let's get talking and put this into proper perspective. I'm being joined by an economist and research professor, former chief economist at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Dr. Andrew Nevin from Dallas, United States. Thank you so much. It's good to see you.
Hello, it's always great to see you.
Well, let's start with the United Kingdom and Nigeria's business relations. I'm particularly excited with the figures that we see, breaking that down. £4 billion of exports and also £3 billion on our side. It looks like there's a balance there. What do you make of these figures? How can we get better with trade relations?
Well, I mean, I think obviously there's such deep ties between the United Kingdom and Nigeria, and High Commissioner Richard is a great friend of Nigeria. But I mean, I think that the numbers could be bigger. But also, just one thing I need to point out is I think the United Kingdom right now, and no fault of the High Commissioners, is really being unfair to the United Kingdom. Of course, the biggest export for the United Kingdom, from Nigeria to the United Kingdom is Nigerian brains. And they have a great demand for people to do many things, including, for example, in their service industry, health service industry. But the process that the United Kingdom has put in for new immigrants, I mean, they, in a sense, are contradictory. They need people to come to their country to do the jobs that aren't being done, that are very important as the population ages, but they make it very difficult and very expensive. So the visa process is expensive. You have to get sponsored by a company. If you arrive in the United Kingdom, some Nigerians find out that the company that sponsored them no longer has a position for them or has gone out of business. They have to scramble and maybe have extra expenses and try to get that visa switched. So I think it's really in that area, which is really the most important export of Nigeria right now to the United Kingdom. It's not really very fair right now. And of course, the things that the High Commissioner cites, I mean, the usual export of agricultural products, we all know that, cocoa, for example, groundnuts. We also know the processes that we need to put in place to be able to export those. But those aren't the big money things. The big money things are going to continue to be people, both people that leave Nigeria physically, so they JAPA, but also ones that stay in Nigeria and deliver services. Business processing, outsourcing. So it's a great relationship. Of course, football is also at the heart of it. Music is at the heart of it. But there could be a lot more that's being done. And the other thing we need to add, of course, is the United Kingdom's economy has done very poorly under the Tories over about 14 years. It's almost surely the case they're going to lose the next election, which is later this year. And the United Kingdom really has to have a bit of a rethink in this modern world, how they fit in economically.
Well, but I want to follow up that. Do you think Nigeria has anything really to gain from the UK post-Brexit, free markets and all of this? Do you see us gaining from this?
No, not particularly. As I said, I mean, the United Kingdom has to face up. It had an amazing empire in the 19th century, perhaps the greatest empire the world has ever seen. But it's a small, middling country who's has some tremendous assets, but still seems to think it's an empire. And you know, from an economic viewpoint, I mean, the vice president was supposed to be in Dallas today, where I am. I was really excited for his visit and been organizing a few people to see him. Unfortunately, that won't happen. But I mean, the United States economy continues to power along. Nigerians have a deep, affectionate relationship with the United States. I think the United States has a lot more potential for positively impacting the Nigerian economy and society than the United Kingdom, quite frankly, even though my home is Britain.
I like that. But let's look at major challenges before we shift to the second part of our discussion to promote foreign businesses. And the issues here are operational knowledge and, of course, standards, stringent standards. Do you think that the African continent, or not just Nigeria now, do you think we are ready to compete? Do you think our goods meet the standards to stay on the shelf with imported ones?
Well, you know what I'm going to say to that. We shouldn't be focusing on exporting goods except in a few cases. Again, those agricultural goods that are cited, we should be exporting services. And I think one very big positive for the country in the last few months is His Excellency the Vice President has put in place a major initiative with the private sector to drive the export of services. It is much easier, much better competitive positioning for Nigeria to export these services than to try to export the goods. So when you say, are Nigerian goods going to be side by side on UK shelves? No, I don't think that is going to happen, except, as I said, in a few agricultural commodities. But what is going to happen is that Nigerians are going to be sitting in Nigeria, not necessarily sitting in Lagos, sitting in all over the country, are going to be delivering very high value-added services that for the UK, for the United States, for Canada, and for countries, non-English speaking countries. And in fact, I mean, people know I'm a big fan of Amal Hassan, who created the largest domestic outsourcing company in Nigeria. It has 2,000 employees. She just opened an office in Gombe, and that Gombe office will deliver services to international clients. So no, Nigerian goods are not going to be competitive side by side on the shelves in the UK or Europe, or the United States or Canada, but the Nigerian services, professional services, legal services, BPO, coding services, gaming, are all going to be competitive. And of course, we're very competitive in sports and in music and Nollywood already.
Finally, on this case, the AFCFTA still remains on one side, and I'm not seeing so much energy around the positives of this very important agreement act. Just like AGOA, that Nigeria didn't really take advantage of it. Do you think AFTA is a game changer, really?
No, I do think it is. But, when I was in country, people asked me, I said, look, this is part of a 50-year strategy for the African Union. I mean, this was published in 2013 as an aspiration for 2063. And I think people were very unrealistic in the short term how the AFCFTA would impact Africa. But, I still think the political will is there. The people's will is there for a more integrated, prosperous, and powerful Africa on the world stage. So I think it's just step by step. So I think people that start to complain AFCFTA has not had an impact, we're expecting the wrong things. I mean, I think if anyone who's been around as long as I have learns is that things at one level happen more slowly than you think in the short term, but in the medium term, 5 to 10 years, they happen faster than you think. So when you hit these tipping points, things go very fast. So I'm not disappointed in AFCFTA. I still think there's a tremendous kind of Pan-African zeitgeist at the present time, and we'll get the benefit from it. But just take it step by step by step. It's not going to happen in 6 months. It's not going to happen in a year. And I remember all of these conferences and workshops going on, take advantage of AFCFTA. And I said at the time, I thought this was premature. Just take it one step at a time. Harmonize standards, use technology to harmonize imports and exports. And then over time, we will see this increasing trade between Africans. So I have no doubt about it over the medium and long term, but I'm not surprised in the short term people are finding it challenging.
Interesting. Let's now talk about energy prices. And this is not limited to Nigeria. We see a serious shift when it comes to energy prices, even here in Nigeria, despite the efforts by the Dangote refinery. Diesel is still selling for 1,000 or a little above 1,000 naira. For PMS, we still have issues around the pricing, and of course, electricity tariff is also on the high side. You will remember, maybe when you were still in the country, that we didn't have the issue of the band A, band B. Now band A users are paying above 200 naira for 1 unit of electricity being consumed by every home or by every customer. My question to you now is, what do you make of all of these increases on our purchasing power moving forward? How does it affect Nigerians that already have less purchasing power? What does it mean for us?
Well, first off, the fact that we're having this conversation, Tolo, is absolutely crazy. We are a major energy net exporter, major energy producer. I think we have the world's second or third highest reserves of gas, and we're complaining about high energy prices. We should be in a situation where high energy prices are fantastic for us. And of course, when we use the gas domestically to produce electricity, that should actually be very low cost. Solar, we've got abundant solar. So what's the root cause of this? I mean, I've been saying for at least a year, number one objective of the government is to get oil production up because it'll stabilize the exchange rate. It'll, in fact, bring it down. I mean, why we have $80 oil, if you say high energy prices, and yet we have exchange rate at 1,200, 1,400, it was almost 2,000 a few weeks ago. So, this is completely self-inflicted, that the fact that high energy prices are causing hardship to Nigerians. If the government can manage, and of course we announced almost a decade ago that we would become, we were more of a gas country than an oil country, which at the time I said was exactly right. But, the execution by the government, first by the last administration, but, very disappointingly, I was one of the people who was very optimistic when His Excellency President Tinubu came in. You remember almost a year ago, or I guess almost exactly a year ago now, we had the initial announcements around the FX harmonization about the removal of oil subsidy. They came out and said we would get oil production up, which is, I've said from an economic viewpoint, would stabilize the exchange rate, not at 1,000, but at 600, 500, and that simply hasn't happened. And again, I come back to the NNPC. I don't understand why there's such a lack of transparency at the NNPC. So the CBN, changed leadership. There was a big change in governance, new regime there, transparency. CBN and NNPC are the two most important economic institutions in the country. NNPC is the greatest asset of the Nigerian people, apart from Nigerian brains, which everyone knows I talk about. But as a hard asset, NNPC is the greatest asset, and yet there's no transparency. It's not clear what's going on. There are rumors that the oil subsidy has crept back into it. We have an exchange rate that's really problematic. I mean, when you produce electricity, the solar might be free, the gas might be low price, but all the physical infrastructure, the capital costs, of course, are paid in US dollars. So when you let the exchange rate get to $1,200, $1,400, the discos rightly say, and the producers rightly say, the energy producers, we need higher tariffs in there. So again, this is completely self-inflicted. We should be celebrating. $80 oil, I think, is a sweet spot for Nigeria. We should be producing 2 million, 2.2 million barrels a day. We should be producing lots of gas, exporting some of it, using it domestically for electricity. We should be taking advantage of solar. We should have a 500 Naira exchange rate, and then we would be in a very good place. But so we're in the sweet spot for where energy prices are for our economy, but we haven't taken advantage of it because of the execution failures, which I largely lay blame it to the new administration has had a year to get this under control and have not made much progress. So sorry to be so blunt. It's obviously a little easier to be so blunt when I'm no longer with PwC, but I remain very optimistic about Nigeria. But this issue of the NNPC not performing, and then we talk about this incredible investment we should have in gas, which we should have, is not coming, whether it's for regulatory reasons or whether it's because we can't execute at the government level. This needs to get solved. Otherwise, you're going to continue to have this hardship on Nigerians, electricity prices taking more of their budget, people not having access to power. I mean, I was told a home solar system now is 800,000 Naira. I mean, not a big surprise given the movement in the exchange rate. So all of a sudden, something that should be accessible to almost every Nigerian is no longer accessible. So it's really a tragedy. And I think the government needs to really focus on why NNPC is not being performing.
But I want to follow up with the NNPC issue which you've raised, and the argument will be the Petroleum Industry Act is supposed to open up the activities of the NNPC. At the moment, many say there is still under recovery because actually if you look at the price of crude and in the international market, the price of PMS and diesel should be almost at par. So it's as if there's an intervention again by government. So that brings us back to the question of subsidy and implementation of the PIA. How does all of this come to you?
Well, I mean, we said there was no subsidy. The idea was that there would be multiple players that could import petroleum products into the country. As you say, you just look at the mathematics. There must be a subsidy somewhere. It's totally opaque how that's getting paid. I mean, that in a way is taking away, as we know before, when you remove the subsidy back a year ago, immediately the states, the local LGAs got a significant amount of money. They were in effect carrying a lot of the subsidy. But it's the fact that this is so opaque that I think the Nigerians should be upset about. Where are the accounts for the NNPC? I mean, we have the PIA. I mean, I've always advocated for some flotation of parts of NNPC. Some people have advocated for floating NNPC, partial flotation, so say 20%. So Nigerians still own 80% of it, but the rest is floated on the stock market. Others can buy directly into it, but that would force NNPC to have much more transparency. So we've had the PIA, and people kind of understand in concept where it was supposed to take us to, but I don't see the path forward. And for specifically on the subsidy issue, we should have much more transparency right now. What is happening within the money flows at the NNPC? Are we paying the cash calls to keep our share of the production, for example? This is a national asset that's owned by Nigerians, and we don't have that transparency of what's actually going on.
Interesting. A lot of developments are there. Let's wrap up almost fine. You talked on gas, which for me remains also very important. That same document, the PIA, is supposed to open up this segment of the oil and gas industry and attract investment, particularly for gas infrastructure, which we lack as a country. Now, do you see us getting also along that line? Are we moving towards energy transition in this part of the world, in your judgment? Because we are a decade of gas, a lot around gas, but we are still not taking advantage of it. Infrastructure.
No, we haven't made much progress. I mean, there are lots of positive things going on in the economy. And sorry, I just also need to say I was very upset about the destruction of a landmark in Lagos. I mean, you talk about getting investment into the country. So an investor who's bringing in assets like gas assets, which is supposed to last 20 years, they watch what happens at Landmark and other cases. But in the Landmark case, the leadership there had invested a long period of time. That Landmark Center, I mean, many people listening have been there for different events. Was the home to the bookstore that carried the book that Rufai Oseni and Uma and I wrote, and others on self-organizing Nigeria, and to see it destroyed for the idea. I mean, we know the coastal highway is not going to be anywhere near that close to the coast when it arrives in Lagos. So that was completely opaque to me. What was the reason for it? But why we're not getting gas investment? Any investor is going to know these kinds of stories happening and are going to be reluctant. So we haven't made much progress. We had a golden opportunity when, sadly, Russia invaded Ukraine, and Europe realized it was its gas security situation was very difficult. We could have really followed up there and tried to create the conditions in which Europe would secure its gas supply in Nigeria. That didn't happen on that. So, the gas has been a big disappointment, quite frankly.
So in all of this, let's do a general overview. What's your outlook for Nigeria's economy and, of course, the globe? There are still a lot of issues around the globe affecting movement of goods and services, affecting transmission channels and chains. So what do you think? Even the fuel scarcity we had in Nigeria, or that we still have, was alluded. The issues were, part of it was that some refineries are going through turnaround maintenance. That's abroad in Amsterdam and some other countries. What's your outlook for the global economy? Of course, staying also with Nigeria and what is happening here.
Well, the global economy is going to just grow slowly, right? I mean, you have all the issues that you've cited, and also just the fact that globally the world is aging and people who are older don't produce or consume as much. So the idea that the global economy's growth rate is going to bail out Africa or Nigeria is misplaced. But, I've consistently said over the years, we can't do anything about the global economy. All we can do is what's going on in Nigeria. So, why am I optimistic? Because despite all the global problems, and despite the domestic things I've highlighted today, there's still lots of Nigerians trying to do innovative things, some of them for profit, some of them in NGOs. So again, I think these bottom-up initiatives, whether in the private sector or the NGO sector, are the things that are ultimately going to transform Nigeria. Now, if we had better federal government of Nigeria, I won't say policies, we have great policies. If we had better execution, the federal government, things would go faster. But, this bottom-up forces in Nigeria, state-level forces, are really, I cited Amal's opening something in Gombe, which is fantastic. So a lot of that's going on. We continue to repeat the bad news. I don't like repeating the bad news, as you know. So I'm optimistic, but I think it's going to take a bit longer than I would have liked because the federal government hasn't delivered on the enormous promise it had a year ago. But please stop worrying about the global economy. The global economy is only going to grow 2% for the next 2 decades.
Wow. But that will one way or the other impact what we expect here too. Don't you think so?
Nigeria is the seventh or sixth largest population country in the world. West Africa's 500 million people. There's plenty of domestic market if things were going well. I mean, the whole idea of AFCFTA was Africans have to be wealthy. Africans have to trade with Africans. So there's lots of opportunity, even if the number of people in Europe is shrinking. It's just my view.
Well, I like that. On that very optimistic note, let's wrap up this conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Economist Research Professor Dr. Andrew Nevin. Thank you so much. Do enjoy the rest of the day, and we really appreciate your time.
Tolo, it's always a great pleasure to be with you, brother. And stay optimistic.
All right.